Chapter 14 of Dead Men Tell No Tales by E. W. Hornung. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine. Dead Men Tell No Tales by E. W. Hornung. Chapter 14 In the Garden. It so happened that I met nobody at all, but I must confess that my luck was better than my management. As I came upon the beck, a new sound reached me with the swirl. It was the jingle of bit and bridle, the beat of hoofs came after, and I had barely time to fling myself flat, when two horsemen emerged from the plantation, riding straight towards me in the moonlight. If they continued on that course they could not fail to see me as they passed along the opposite bank. However, to my unspeakable relief, they were scarce clear of the trees when they turned their horses' heads, rode them through the water a good 70 yards from where I lay, and so away at a canter across country towards the road. On my hands and knees I had a good look at them as they bobbed up and down under the moon, and my fears subsided in astonished curiosity, for I have already boasted of my eyesight, and I could have sworn that neither Rattray nor any one of his guests was of the horsemen, yet the back and shoulders of one of these seemed somehow familiar to me. Not that I wasted any moments over the coincidence, for I had other things to think about as I ran on to the Hall. I found the rear of the building in darkness and relieved from within. On the other hand, the climbing moon beat so full upon the garden wall, it was as though a lantern pinned me as I crept beneath it. In passing I thought I might as well try the gate, but Eva was right, it was locked, and that made me half inclined to distrust my eyes in the matter of the two horsemen, for whence could they have come, if not from the Hall? In any case I was well rid of them. I now followed the wall some little distance, and then, to see over it, walked backwards until I was all but in the beck, and there, sure enough, shone my darling's candle, close against the diamond panes of her narrow lofty window. It brought those ready tears back to my foolish fevered eyes. But for sentiment there was no time, and every other emotion was either futile or premature. So I mastered my full heart, I steeled my wretched nerves, and braced my limp muscles for the task that lay before them. I had a garden wall to scale, nearly twice my own height, and without notch or cranny in the ancient, solid masonry. I stood against it on my toes, and I touched it with my finger tips as high up as possible. Some 4 feet severed them from the coping that left only half a sky above my upturned eyes. I do not know whether I have made it plain that the house was not surrounded by 4 walls, but merely filled a breach in one of the 4, which nipped it, as it were, at either end. The back entrance was approachable enough, but barred or watched, I might be very sure. It is ever the vulnerable points which are most securely guarded, and it was my one comfort that the difficult way must also be the safe way, if only the difficulty could be overcome. How to overcome it was the problem. I followed the wall right round to the point at which it abutted on the tower that immured my love. The height never varied, nor could my hands or eyes discover a single foothold, ledge, or other means of mounting to the top. Yet my hot head was full of ideas, and I wasted some minutes in trying to lift from its hinges a solid, thick barred outlying gate, that my weak arms could hardly stir. More time went in pulling branches from the oak trees about the beck, where the latter ran nearest to the moonlit wall. I had an insane dream of throwing a long forked branch over the coping, and so swarming up, hand over hand. But even to me the impracticability of this plan came home at last, and there I stood in a breathless lather, much time and strength thrown away together, and the candle burning down for nothing in that little lofty window, and the running water swirling noisily over its stones at my back. This was the only sound. The wind had died away, The moonlit valley lay as still as the dread old house in its midst but for the splash and gurgle of the beck. I fancied this grew louder as I paused and listened in my helplessness. All at once was it the tongue of nature telling me the way, or common gumption returning at the 11th hour? I ran down to the water's edge and could have shouted for joy. Great stones lay in equal profusion on bed and banks. I lifted one of the heaviest in both hands. I staggered with it to the wall. I came back for another. For some 20 minutes I was so employed, my ultimate reward a fine heap of boulders against the wall. Then I began to build, then mounted my pile, clawing the wall to keep my balance. My fingers were still many inches from the coping. I jumped down and gave another 10 minutes to the back-breaking work of carrying more boulders from the water to the wall. Then I widened my cairn below, so that I could stand firmly before springing upon the pinnacle with which I completed it. I knew well that this would collapse under me if I allowed my weight to rest more than an instant upon it, and so at last it did, but my fingers had clutched the coping in time, had grabbed it, even as the insecure pyramid crumbled and left me dangling. Instantly exerting what muscle I had left and the occasion gave me, I succeeded in pulling myself up until my chin was on a level with my hands, when I flung an arm over and caught the inner coping. The other arm followed, then a leg, and at last I sat astride the wall, panting and palpitating, and hardly able to credit my own achievement. One great difficulty had been my huge revolver. I had been terribly frightened it might go off, and had finally used my cravat to sling it at the back of my neck. It had shifted a little, and I was working it round again, preparatory to my drop, when I saw the light suddenly taken from the window in the tower, and a kerchief waving for one instant in its place. So she had been waiting and watching for me all these hours! I dropped into the garden in a very ecstasy of grief and rapture, to think that I had been so long in coming to my love, but that I had come at last. And I picked myself up in a very frenzy of fear lest, after all, I should fail to spirit her from this horrible place. Doubly desolate it looked in the rays of that bright October moon. Skulking in the shadow of the wall which had so long baffled me, I looked across a sharp border of shape upon a chaos, the more striking for its lingering trim design. The long, straight paths were barnacled with weeds, the dense, fine hedges, once prim and angular, had flattened out of all shape or form, and on the velvet sward of other days you might have waded waist high in rotten hay. Towards the garden end this rank jungle merged into a worse wilderness of rhododendrons, the tallest I have ever seen. On all this the white moon smiled, and the grim house glowered, to the eternal swirl and rattle of the beck beyond its walls. Long enough I stood where I had dropped, listening with all my being for some other sound, but at last the great studded door creaked and shivered on its ancient hinges, and I heard voices arguing in the Portuguese tongue. It was poor Eva wheedling that black rascal José. I saw her in the lighted porch, the nigger I saw also, shrugging and gesticulating for all the world like his hateful master, yet giving in, I felt certain, though I could not understand a word that reached me. And indeed my little mistress very soon sailed calmly out, followed by final warnings and expostulations hurled from the step, for the black stood watching her as she came steadily my way, now raising her head to sniff the air, now stooping to pluck up a weed, the very picture of a prisoner seeking the open air for its own sake solely. I had a keen eye apiece for them as I cowered closer to the wall, revolver in hand. But ere my love was very near me, for she would stand long moments gazing ever so innocently at the moon, her jailer had held a bottle to the light and had beaten a retreat so sudden and so hasty that I expected him back every moment, and so durst not stir. Eva saw me, however, and contrived to tell me so without interrupting the air that she was humming as she walked. "Follow me," she sang. "Only keep as you are, close to the wall, close to the wall." And on she strolled to her own tune, and came abreast of me without turning her head. So I crept in the shadow, my ugly weapon tucked out of sight, and she sauntered in the shine, until we came to the end of the garden, where the paths turned at right angles, running behind the rhododendrons. Once in their shelter, she halted and beckoned me, and next instant I had her hands in mine. "At last," was all that I could say for many a moment, as I stood there gazing into her dear eyes, no hero in my heroic hour, but the bigger, lovesick fool than ever. "But quick, quick, quick!" I added, as she brought me to my senses by withdrawing her hands. "We've no time to lose." And I looked wildly from wall to wall, only to find them as barren and inaccessible on this side as on the other. "We have more time than you think," were Eva's first words. "We can do nothing for half an hour." "Why not?" "I'll tell you in a minute. How did you manage to get over?" "Brought boulders from the beck and piled them up till I could reach the top." I thought her eyes glistened. "What patience!" she cried softly. "We must find a simpler way of getting out, and I think I have. They've all gone, you know, but José." "All three?" "The captain has been gone all day." "Then the other two must have been my horsemen, very probably in some disguise," and my head swam with the thought of the risk that I had run at the very moment when I thought myself safest. Well, I would have finished them both, but I did not say so to Eva. I did not mention the incident, I was so fearful of destroying her confidence in me. Apologizing, therefore, for my interruption, without explaining it, I begged her to let me hear her plan. It was simple enough. There was no fear of the others returning before midnight. The chances were that they would be very much later, and now it was barely 11, and Eva had promised not to stay out above half an hour. When it was up, José would come and call her. "It is horrid to have to be so cunning," cried little Eva, with an angry shudder, "but it's no use thinking of that," she was quick enough to add, "when you have such dreadful men to deal with, such fiends. And I have had all day to prepare, and have suffered till I am so desperate I would rather die tonight than spend another in that house. Now, let me finish. José would come round here to look for me, but you and I will be hiding on the other side of those rhododendrons, and when we hear him here, we'll make a dash for it across the long grass. Once let us get the door shut and locked in his face, and he'll be in the trap. It will take him some time to break it, time enough to give us a start. What's more, when he finds us gone, he'll do what they all used to do in any doubt." "What's that?" "Say nothing till it's found out, then lie for their lives, and it was their lives, poor creatures, on the Zambesi." She was silent a moment, her determined little face hard, set upon some unforgotten horror. "Once we get away, I shall be surprised if it's found out till morning," concluded Eva, without a word as to what I was to do with her, neither indeed had I myself given that question a moment's consideration. "Then let's make a dash for it now," was all I said or thought. "No, they can't come yet, and José is strong and brutal, and I have heard how ill you are, that you should have come to me notwithstanding," and she broke off with her little hands lying so gratefully on my shoulders that I know not how I refrained from catching her then and there to my heart. Instead, I laughed and said that my illness was a pure and deliberate sharp, and my presence there its direct result. And such was the virtue in my beloved's voice, the magic of her eyes, the healing of her touch, that I was scarce conscious of deceit, but felt a whole man once more as we two stood together in the moonlight. In a trance I stood there gazing into her brave young eyes. In a trance I suffered her to lead me by the hand through the rank, dense rhododendrons, and still entranced I crouched by her side near the further side, with only unkempt grass plot and a weedy path between us and that ponderous door, wide open still, and replaced by a section of the lighted hail within. On this we fixed our attention, with mingled dread and impatience, those contending elements of suspense. But the black was slow to reappear, and my eyes stole home to my sweet girl's face, with its glory of moonlight curls, and the eager, resolute, embittered look that put the world back 2 whole months, and Eva Denison upon the Lady Jermyn's poop, in the ship's last hours. But it was not her look alone. She had on her cloak, as the night before, but with me, God bless her, she found no need to clasp herself in its folds, and underneath she wore the very dress in which she had sung at our last concert, and been rescued in the gig. It looked as though she had worn it ever since. The roses were crushed and soiled, the tulle all torn, and tarnished some strings of beads that had been gold. A tatter of Chantilly lace hung by a thread. It is another of the relics that I have unearthed in the writing of this narrative. "I thought men never noticed dresses," my love said suddenly, a pleased light in her eyes, I thought, in spite of all. "Do you really remember it?" "I remember every one of them," I said indignantly, and so I did. "You will wonder why I wear it," said Eva quickly. "It was the first that came that terrible night. They have given me many since, but I won't wear one of them, not one." How her eyes flashed! I forgot all about José. "I suppose you know why they hadn't room for you in the gig?" she went on. "No, I don't know, and I don't care. They had room for you," said I. "That's all I care about." And to think she could not see I loved her. "But do you mean to say you don't know that these murderers set fire to the ship?" "No yes I heard you say so last night." "And you don't want to know what for?" Out of politeness I protested that I did, but, as I live, all I wanted to know just then was whether my love loved me, whether she ever could, whether such happiness was possible under heaven. "You remember all that mystery about the cargo?" she continued, eagerly, her pretty lips so divinely parted. "It turned out to be gunpowder," said I, still thinking only of her. "No, gold." "But it was gunpowder," I insisted, for it was my incorrigible passion for accuracy which had led up to half our arguments on the voyage. But this time Eva let me off. "It was also gold, 12,000 ounces from the diggings. That was the real mystery. Do you mean to say you never guessed?" "No, by Jove, I didn't," said I. She had diverted my interest at last. I asked her if she had known on board. "Not until the last moment. I found out during the fire. Do you remember when we said good bye? I was nearly telling you then." Did I remember? The very letter of that last interview was cut deep into my heart. Not a sleepless night had I passed without rehearsing it word for word and look for look; and sometimes, when sorrow had spent itself, and the heart could bleed no more, vain grief had given place to vainer speculation, and I had cudgelled my wakeful brains for the meaning of the new unsupple horror which I had read in my darling's eyes at the last. Now I understood, and the one explanation brought such a tribe in its train, that even the perilous ecstasy of the present moment was temporarily forgotten in the horrible past. "Now I know why they wouldn't have me in the gig," I cried softly. "She carried 4 heavy men's weight in gold." "When on earth did they get it aboard?" "In provision boxes at the last, but they had been filling the boxes for weeks." "Why, I saw them doing it," I cried. "But what about the gig? Who picked you up?" She was watching the open door once more, and she answered with notable indifference. "Mr. Rattray." "So that's the connection," said I, "and I think its very simplicity what surprised me most." "Yes, he was waiting for us at Ascension." "Then it was all arranged?" "Every detail." "And this young blackguard is as bad as any of them?" "Worse," said she, with bitter brevity. Nor had I ever seen her look so hard but once, and that was the night before in the old Justice Hall, when she told Rattray her opinion of him to his face. She had now the same angry flush, the same set mouth and scornful voice, and I took it finally into my head that she was unjust to the poor devil, villain though he was. With all his villainy, I declined to believe him as bad as the others. I told her so in as many words. And in a moment we were arguing as though we were back on the Lady Jermyn with nothing else to do. "You may admire wholesale murderers and thieves," said Eva. "I do not." "Nor I. My point is simply that this one is not as bad as the rest. I believe he was really glad for my sake when he discovered that I knew nothing of the villainy. Come now, has he ever offered you any personal violence?" "Me, Mr. Rattray? I should hope not, indeed." "Has he never saved you from any?" "I don't know." "Then I do. When you left them last night there was some talk of bringing you back by force. You can guess who suggested that, and who set his face against it and got his way. You would think the better of Rattray had you heard what passed." "Should I?" she asked half eagerly, as she looked quickly round at me, and suddenly I saw her eyes fill. "Oh, why will you speak about him?" she burst out. "Why must you defend him, unless it's to go against me, as you always did and always will? I never knew anybody like you, never. I want you to take me away from these wretches, and all you do is to defend them." "Not all," said I, clasping her hand warmly in mine. "Not all, not all. I will take you away from them, never fear. In another hour God grant you may be out of their reach for ever." "But where are we to go?" she whispered wildly. "What are you to do with me? All my friends think me dead, and if they knew I was not, it would all come out." "So it shall," said I, "the sooner the better. If I'd had my way it would all be out already." I see her yet, my passionate darling, as she turned upon me, whiter than the full white moon. "Mr. Cole," said she, "you must give me your sacred promise that so far as you are concerned it shall never come out at all." This monstrous conspiracy, this cold-blooded massacre! And I crouched aghast. "Yes, it could do no good, and at any rate, unless you promise I remain where I am." "In their hands?" "Decidedly. To warn them in time. Leave them I would, but betray them never." What could I say? What choice had I in the face of an alternative so headstrong and so unreasonable? To rescue Eva from these miscreants I would have let every malefactor in the country go unscathed. Yet the condition was a hard one, and, as I hesitated, my love went on her knees to me, there in the moonlight among the rhododendrons. "Promise, promise, or you will kill me," she gasped. "They may deserve it richly, but I would rather be torn in little pieces than have them hanged." "It's too good for most of them." "Promise." "To hold my tongue about them all?" "Yes, promise." "Promise." "When 100 lives were sacrificed." "Promise." "I can't," I said. "It's wrong." "Then good by," she cried, starting to her feet. "No, no," and I caught her hand. "Well, then, I promise." End of the chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Dead Men Tell No Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine. Dead Men Tell No Tales by E.W. Hornung. Chapter 15 First Blood. So I bound myself to a guilty secrecy for Eva's sake, to save her from these wretches, or if you will, to win her for myself. Nor did it strike me as very strange, after a moment's reflection, that she should intercede thus earnestly for a band headed by her own mother's widower, prime scoundrel of them all, though she knew him to be. The only surprise was that she had not interceded in his name, that I should have forgotten, and she should have allowed me to forget, the very existence of so indisputable a claim upon her loyalty. This, however, made it a little difficult to understand the hysterical gratitude with which my unwilling promise was received. Poor darling! She was beside herself with sheer relief. She wept as I had never seen her weep before. She seized and even kissed my hands, as one who neither knew nor cared what she did, surprising me so much by her emotion that this expression of it passed unheeded. I was the best friend she had ever had. I was her one good friend in all the world. She would trust herself to me, and if I would but take her to the convent where she had been brought up, she would pray for me there until her death, but that would not be very long. All of which confused me utterly. It seemed an inexplicable breakdown in one who had shown such nerve and courage hitherto, and so hearty a loathing for that damnable Santos. So completely had her presence of mind forsaken her that she looked no longer where she had been gazing hitherto. And thus it was that neither of us saw José until we heard him calling, "Senhora Eva, Senhora Eva," with some rapid sentences in Portuguese. "Now is our time," I whispered, crouching lower and clasping a small hand gone suddenly cold. "Think of nothing now but getting out of this. I'll keep my word once we are out, and here's the toy that's going to get us out." And I produced my Deane and Adams with no small relish. A little trustful pressure was my answer and my reward. Meanwhile the black was singing out lustily in evident suspicion and alarm. "He says they are coming back," whispered Eva, "but that's impossible." "Why?" "Because if they were he couldn't see them, and if he heard them he would be frightened of their hearing him. But here he comes." A shuffling quick step on the path, a running grumble of unmistakable threats, a shambling moonlit figure, seen in glimpses through the leaves, very near us for an instant, then hidden by the shrubbery as he passed within a few yards of our hiding place. A diminuendo of the shuffling steps, then a cursing, frightened savage at one end of the rhododendrons, and we two stealing out at the other, hand in hand, and bent quite double into the long neglected grass. "Can you run for it?" I whispered. "Yes, but not too fast, for fear we trip." "Come on, then." The lighted open doorway grew greater at every stride. "He hasn't seen us yet." "No, I hear him threatening me still." "Now he has, though." A wild whoop proclaimed the fact, and upright we tore at top speed through the last 10 yards of grass, while the black rushed down one of the side paths, gaining audibly on us over the better ground. But our start had saved us, and we flew up the steps as his feet ceased to clatter on the path. He had plunged into the grass to cut off the corner. "Thank God!" cried Eva. "Now shut it quick." The great door swung home with a mighty clatter, and Eva seized the key in both hands. "I can't turn it." To lose a second was to take a life, and unconsciously I was sticking at that, perhaps from no higher instinct than distrust of my aim. Our pursuer, however, was on the steps when I clapped my free hand on top of those little white straining ones, and by a timely effort bent both them and the key round together. The word shot home as José hurled himself against the door. Eva bolted it. But the thud was not repeated, and I gathered myself together between the door and the nearest window, for by now I saw there was but one thing for us. The nigger must be disabled, if I could manage such a nicety; if not, the devil take his own. Well, I was not one tick too soon for him. My pistol was not cocked before the crash came that I was counting on, and with it a shower of small glass driving across the 6-foot sill and tinkling of the flags. Next came a black and bloody face, at which I could not fire. I had to wait till I saw his legs, when I promptly shattered one of them at disgracefully short range. The report was as deafening as one upon the stage. The hall filled with white smoke, and remained hideous with the bellowing of my victim. I searched him without a qualm, but threats of annihilation instead, and found him unarmed but for that very knife which Rattray had induced me to hand over to him in town. I had a grim satisfaction, in depriving him of this, and but small compunction in turning my back upon his pain. "Come," I said to poor Eva, "don't pity him, though I dare say he is the most pitiable of the lot. Show me the way through, and I'll follow with this lamp." One was burning on the old oak table. I carried it along a narrow passage, through a great low kitchen, where I bumped my head against the black oak beams, and I held it on high at a door almost as massive as the one which we had succeeded in shutting in the nigger's face. "I was afraid of it," cried Eva, with a sudden sob. "What is it?" "They've taken away the key." Yes, the keen air came through an empty keyhole, and my lamp, held close, not only showed that the door was locked, but that the lock was one with which an unskilled hand might tamper for hours without result. I dealt it a hearty kick by way of a test. The heavy timber did not budge. There was no play at all at either lock or hinges, nor did I see how I could spend one of my 4 remaining bullets upon the former, with any chance of a return. "Is this the only other door?" "Then it must be a window." "All the back ones are barred." "Securely?" "Yes." "Then we have no choice in the matter." And I led the way back to the hall, where the poor black devil lay, blubbering in his blood. In the kitchen I found the bottle of wine, Rattray's best port, that they were trying to make her take for her health, with which Eva had bribed him, and I gave it to him before laying hands on a couple of chairs. "What are you going to do?" "Go out the way we came." "But the wall?" "Pile up these chairs, and as many more as we may need if we can't open the gate." But Eva was not paying attention any longer, either to me or to José. His white teeth were showing in a grin for all his pain. Her eyes were fixed in horror on the floor. "They've come back," she gasped. "The underground passage. Hark! Hark!" There was a muffled rush of feet beneath our own, then a dull but very distinguishable clatter on some invisible stair. "Underground passage!" I exclaimed, and in my sheer disgust I forgot what was due to my darling. "Why on earth didn't you tell me of it before?" "There was so much to tell you. It leads to the sea. Oh, what shall we do? You must hide upstairs, anywhere," cried Eva, wildly. "Leave them to me, leave them to me." "I like that," said I, and I did, but I detested myself for the tears my words had drawn, and I prepared to die for them. "They'll kill you, Mr. Cole." "It would serve me right, but we'll see about it." And I stood with my revolver very ready in my right hand, while with the other I caught poor Eva to my side, even as a door flew open, and Rattray himself burst upon us, a lantern in his hand, and the perspiration shining on his handsome face in its light. I can see him now as he stood dumbfounded on the threshold of the hall, and yet at the time my eyes sped past him into the room beyond. It was the one I have described as being lined with books. There was a long rent in this lining, where the books had opened with a door, through which Captain Harris, Joaquin Santos, and Jane Braithwaite followed Rattray in quick succession, the men all with lanterns, the woman scarlet and dishevelled even for her. It was over the squire's shoulders I saw their faces. He kept them from passing him in the doorway by a free use of his elbows, and when I looked at him again, his black eyes were blazing from a face white with passion, and they were fixed upon me. "What the devil brings you here?" he thundered at last. "Don't ask idle questions," was my reply to that. "So you were shamming to day?" "I was taking a leaf out of your book." "You'll gain nothing by being clever," sneered the squire, taking a threatening step forward. For at the last moment I had tucked my revolver behind my back, not only for the pleasure, but for the obvious advantage of getting them all in front of me and off their guard. I had no idea that such eyes as Rattray's could be so fierce. They were dancing from me to my companion, whom their glitter frightened into an attempt to disengage herself from me, but my arm only tightened about her drooping figure. "I shall gain no more than I expect," said I carelessly, "and I know what to expect from brave gentlemen like you. It will be better than your own fate, at all events; anything's better than being taken hence to the place of execution, and hanged by the neck until you're dead, all three of you in a row, and your bodies buried with the presence of the prison." "The very thing for him," murmured Santos, "the very thing." "But I'm so soft hearted," I went insanely on, "that I should be sorry to see that happen to such fine fellows as you are. Come out of that, you little fraud behind there." It was my betrayers skulking in the room. "Come out and line up with the rest. No, I'm not going to see you fellows dance on nothing. I've another kind of ball apiece for you, and one between them for the Braithwaites." Well, I suppose I always had a nasty tongue in me, and rather enjoyed making play with it on provocation; but, if so, I met with my deserts that night. For the nigger of the Lady Jermyn lay all but hid behind Eva and me. If they saw him at all, they may have thought him drunk; but, as for myself, I had fairly forgotten his existence until the very moment came for showing my revolver, when it was twisted out of my grasp instead, and a ball sang under my arm as the brute fell back exhausted and the weapon clattered beside him. Before I could stoop for it there was a dead weight on my left arm, and Squire Rattray was over the table at a bound, with his arms jostling mine beneath Eva Denison's senseless form. "Leave her to me," he cried fiercely. "You fool," he added in a lower key, "do you think I'd let any harm come to her?" I looked him in the bright and honest eyes that had made me trust him in the beginning, and I did not utterly distrust him yet. Rather was a guile on my side as I drew back and watched Rattray lift the young girl tenderly, and slowly carry her to the door by which she had entered and left the hall just 24 hours before. I could not take my eyes off them till they were gone, and when I looked for my revolver it also had disappeared. José had not got it; he lay insensible. Santos was whispering to Harris. Neither of them seemed armed. I made sure that Rattray had picked it up and carried it off with Eva. I looked wildly for some other weapon. Two unarmed men and a woman were all I had to deal with, for Braithwaite had long since vanished. Could I but knock the worthless life out of the men, I should have but the squire and his servants to deal with, and in that quarter I still had my hopes of a bloodless battle and a treaty of war. A log fire was smouldering in the open grate. I darted to it, and had a heavy, half burned brand whirling round my head next instant. Harris was the first within my reach. He came gamely at me with his fists. I sprang upon him and struck him to the ground with one blow, the sparks flying far and wide as my smoking brand met the seaman's skull. Santos was upon me next instant, and him, by sheer luck, I managed to serve the same; but I doubt whether either man was stunned, and I was standing ready for them to rise, when I felt myself seized round the neck from behind, and a mass of fluffy hair tickling my cheek, while a shrill voice set up a lusty scream for the squire. I have said that the woman Braithwaite was of a sinister strength, but I had little dreamed how strong she really was. First it was her arms that wound themselves about my neck, long, sinuous, and supple as the tentacles of some vile monster; then, as I struggled, her thumbs were on my windpipe like pads of steel. Tighter she pressed, and tighter yet. My eyeballs started, my tongue lolled. I heard my brand drop, and through a mist I saw it picked up instantly. It crashed upon my skull as I still struggled vainly; again and again it came down mercilessly in the same place, until I felt as though a sponge of warm water had been squeezed over my head, and saw 100 withered masks grinning sudden exultation into mine. But still the lean arm whirled, and the splinters flew, till I was blind with my blood, and the seven senses were beaten out of me. End of the chapter 15.
Of Dead Men Tell No Tales by E. W. Hornung. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Deadlock. It must have been midnight when I opened my eyes. A clock was striking as though it never would stop. My mouth seemed fire. A pungent flavor filled my nostrils. The wine-glass felt cold against my teeth. "That's more like it," muttered a voice close to my ear. An arm was withdrawn from under my shoulders. I was allowed to sink back upon some pillows, and now I saw where I was. The room was large and poorly lighted. I lay in my clothes on an old four-poster bed, and my enemies were standing over me in a group. "I hope you are satisfied," sneered Joaquin Santos, with a flourish of his eternal cigarette. "I am." "You don't do murder in my house, wherever else you may do it." "And now better lead him into nearest police station." "Or will you go and tell the police yourself?" asked the Portuguese, in the same tone of mordant irony. "Aye, aye," growled Harris. "That's the next thing." "No," said Rattray. "The next thing's for you two to leave him to me." "We'll see you damned," cried the captain. "No, no, my friend," said Santos with a shrug. "Let him have his way. He is as fond of his skin as you are of yours. He'll come round to our way in the end. I know the Señor Cole. It is necessary for him to die, but it is not necessary this moment. Let us leave them together for a little bit." "That's all I asked," said Rattray. "You won't ask it twice," rejoined Santos, shrugging. "I know the Señor Cole. There is only one way of dealing with a man like that. Besides, he has half killed my good José. It is necessary for him to die." "I agree with the Señor," said Harris, whose forehead was starred with sticking plaster. "It's him or us, and we're all agin you, squire. You'll have to give in first or last." And the pair were gone. Their steps grew faint in the corridor. When we could no longer hear them, Rattray closed the door and quietly locked it. Then he turned to me, stern enough, and pointed to the door with a hand that shook. "You see how it is?" "Perfectly." "They want to kill you." "Of course they do." "It's your own fault you've run yourself into this. I did my best to keep you out of it, but in you come and spill first blood." "I don't regret it," said I. "Oh, you're damned mule enough not to regret anything," cried Rattray. "I see the sort you are. Yet but for me, I tell you plainly, you'd be a dead man now." "I can't think why you interfered." "You've heard the reason. I won't have murder done here if I can prevent it. So far I have. It rests with you whether I can go on preventing it or not." "With me, does it?" He sat down on the side of the bed. He threw an arm to the far side of my body and leaned over me with savage eyes, now staring into mine, now resting with a momentary gleam of pride upon my battered head. I put up my hand. It lit upon a very turban of bandages, and at that I tried to take his hand in mine. He shook it off, and his eyes met mine more fiercely than before. "See here, Cole," said he. "I don't know how the devil you got wind of anything to start with, and I don't care. What I do know is that you've made bad enough a long chalk worse for all concerned. And you'll have to get yourself out of the mess you've got yourself into, and there's only one way. I suppose Miss Denison has really told you everything this time. What's that? Oh, yes, she's all right again, no thanks to you. Now let's hear what she did tell you. It'll save time." I repeated the hurried disclosures made by Eva in the rhododendrons. He nodded grimly, in confirmation of their truth. "Yes, those are the rough facts. The game was started in Melbourne. My part was to wait at Ascension till the Lady German signalled herself, follow her in a schooner we had bought, and pick up the gig with the gold aboard. Well, I did so, never mind the details now, and never mind the bloody massacre the others had made of it before I came up. God knows I was never a consenting party to that, though I know I'm responsible. I'm in this thing as deep as any of them. I've shared the risks, and I'm going to share the plunder, and I'll swing with the others if it ever comes to that. I deserve it hard enough, and so here we are, we three and the nigger, all four fit to swing in a row. So you were fool enough to tell us, and you step in and find out everything. What's to be done? You know what the others want to do. I say it rests with you whether they do it or not. There's only one other way of meeting the case. What's that? Be in it yourself, man. Come in with me and split my share. I could have burst out laughing in his handsome, eager face. The good faith of this absurd proposal was so incongruously apparent, and so obviously genuine was my young villain's anxiety for my consent. Become accessory after the fact in such a crime? Sell my silence for a price? I concealed my feelings with equal difficulty and resolution. I had plans of my own already, but I must gain time to think them over, nor could I afford to quarrel with Rattray meanwhile. What was the haul? I asked him, with the air of one not unprepared to consider the matter. 12,000 ounces. 48,000 pounds, about. Yes, yes. And your share? 14,000 pounds. Santos takes 20, and Harris and I 14,000 each. And you offer me 7? I do. He was becoming more and more eager and excited. His eyes were brighter than I had ever seen them, but slightly bloodshot, and a coppery flush tinged his clear, sunburned skin. I fancied he had been making somewhat free with the brandy, but loss of blood had cooled my brain, and perhaps natural perversity had also a share in the composure which grew upon me as it deserted my companion. "Why make such a sacrifice?" said I, smiling. "Why not let them do as they like?" "I've told you why. I'm not so bad as all that. I draw the line at bloody murder. Not a life should have been lost if I'd had my way. Besides, I've done all the dirty work by you. Cole, there's been no help for it. We didn't know whether you knew or not. It made all the difference to us, and somebody had to dog you and find out how much you did know. I was the only one who could possibly do it. God knows how I detested the job. I'm more ashamed of it than of worse things. I had to worm myself into your friendship, and by Jove, you made me think you did know, but hadn't let it out, and might any day. So then I got you up here, where you would be in our power if it was so. Surely you can see every move. But this much I'll swear, I had nothing to do with Jose breaking into your room at the hotel. They went behind me there, curse them! And when at last I found out for certain, down here, that you knew nothing after all, I was never more sincerely thankful in my life. I give you my word it took a load off my heart." "I know that," I said. "I also know who broke into my room, and I'm glad I'm even with one of you." "It's done you no good," said Rattray. "Their first thought was to put you out of the way, and it's more than ever their last. You see the sort of men you've got to deal with, and they're 3 to 1, counting the nigger, but if you go in with me, they'll only be 3 to 2. He was manifestly anxious to save me in this fashion, and I suppose that most sensible men, in my dilemma, would at least have nursed or played upon goodwill so lucky and so enduring. But there was always a twist in me that made me love, in my youth, to take the unexpected course, and it amused me the more to lead my young friend on. "And where have you got this gold?" I asked him, in a low voice, so promising that he instantly lowered his, and his eyes twinkled naughtily into mine. "In the old tunnel that runs from this place nearly to the sea," said he. "We Rattrays have always been a pretty warm lot, Cole, and in the old days we were the most festive smugglers on the coast. This tunnel's a relic of 'em. although it was only a tradition till I came into the property. I swore I'd find it, and when I'd done so I made a new connection which you shall see. I'm rather proud of it, and I won't say I haven't used the old drain once or twice after the fashion of my rude forefathers. But never was it such a godsend as it's been this time. By Jove, it would be a sin if you didn't come in with us, Cole. But for the lives these blackguards lost, the thing's gone splendidly. It would be a sin if you went and lost yours, whereas if you come in, the two of us would be able to shake off these devils. We should be too strong for 'em." £7,000, I murmured. 28,000 between us. "Yes, and nearly all of it down below, at this end of the tunnel, and the rest where we dropped it when we heard you were trying to bolt. We'd got it all at the other end, ready to pop aboard the schooner that's lying there still, if you turned out to know anything and to have told what you knew to the police. There was always the possibility of that, you see. We simply daren't show our noses at the bank until we knew how much you knew, and what you'd done and were thinking of doing. As it is, we can take 'em the whole 12,000 ounces, or rather I can, as soon as I like, in broad daylight. I'm a lucky digger. It's all right. Everybody knows I've been out there." He jumped up all excitement, and was at the door next instant. "Stop!" I cried. "Where are you going?" "Downstairs to tell them." "Tell them what?" "That you're going in with me, and it's all right." "And do you really think I am?" He had unlocked the door. After a pause I heard him lock it again. But I did not see his face until he returned to the bedside, and then it frightened me. It was distorted and discoloured with rage and chagrin. "You've been making a fool of me!" he cried fiercely. "No, I have been considering the matter, Rattray." "And you won't accept my offer?" "Of course I won't. I didn't say I'd been considering it." He stood over me with clenched fists and staring eyes. "Don't you see that I want to save your life?" he cried. "Don't you see that this is the only way? Do you suppose a murder more or less makes any difference to that lot downstairs? Are you really such a fool as to die rather than hold your tongue?" "I won't hold it for money, at all events," said I. "But that's what I was coming to." "Very well," he interrupted. "You shall only pretend to touch it. And all I want is to convince the others that it's against your interest to split. Self-interest is the one motive they understand. Your bare word would be good enough for me." "Suppose I won't give my bare word," said I, in a gentle manner which I did not mean to be as irritating as it doubtless was. Yet his proposals and his assumptions were between them making me irritable in my turn. "For heaven's sake, don't be such an idiot, Cole," he burst out in a passion. "You know I'm against the others, and you know what they want, yet you do your best to put me on their side. You know what they are, and yet you hesitate. For the love of God, be sensible. At least give me a word that you'll hold your tongue forever about all you know." "All right," I said. "I'll give you my word, my sacred promise, Rattray, on one condition." "What's that?" "That you let me take Miss Denison away from you, for good and all." His face was transformed with fury. Honest passion faded from it, and left it bloodless, deadly, sinister. "Away from me?" said Rattray through his teeth. "From the lot of you. I remember. You told me that night. You were in love with her. You! "That was nothing to do with it," said I, shaking the bed with my anger and my agitation. "I should hope not. You, indeed, to look at her!" "Well," I cried, "she may never love me, but at least she doesn't loathe me as she loathes you. Yes, the sight of you, and your very name." So I drew blood for blood, and for an instant I thought he was going to make an end of it by incontinently killing me himself. His fists flew out. Had I been a whole man on my legs, he took care to tell me what he would have done, and to drive it home with a mouthful of the oaths which were conspicuously absent from his ordinary talk. "You take advantage of your weakness like any cur," he wound up. "And you of your strengths, like the young bully you are," I retorted. "You do your best to make me one," he answered bitterly. "I try to stand by you at all costs. I want to make amends to you. I want to prevent a crime. Yet there you lie and set your face against a compromise, and there you lie and taunt me with a thing that's gall and wormwood to me already. I know I gave you provocation, and I know I'm rightly served. Why do you suppose I went into this accursed thing at all? Not for the gold, my boy, but for the girl. She won't look at me, and it serves me right. But I say, do you really think she loathes me, Cole?" "I don't see how she can think much better of you than of the crime in which you've had a hand," was my reply, made, however, with as much kindness as I could summon. "The word I used was spoken in anger," said I, for his hand disappeared, and he looked such a miserable, handsome dog as he stood there hanging his guilty head, in the room, I fancied, where he once had lain as a pretty, innocent child. "Cole," said he, "I'd give twice my share of the damned stuff never to have put my hand to the plough, but go back I can't, so there's an end of it." "I don't see it," said I. "You say you didn't go in for the gold. Then give me your share. The others'll jump at it, and Eva won't think the worse of you, at any rate." "But what's to become of her if I drop out?" "You and I will take her to her friends, or wherever she wants to go." "No, no," he cried. "I never yet deserted my pals, and I'm not going to begin." "I don't believe you ever before had such pals to desert," was my reply to that. "Quite apart from my own share in the matter, it makes me positively sick to see a fellow like you mixed up with such a crew in such a game. Get out of it, man. Get out of it while you can. Now's your time. Get out of it, for God's sake." I sat up in my eagerness. I saw him waver, and for one instant a great hope fluttered in my heart. But his teeth met, his face darkened. He shook his head. "That's the kind of rot that isn't worth talking, and you ought to know it," he said. "When I begin a thing I go through with it, though it lands me in hell, as this one will. I can't help that. It's too late to go back. I'm going on, and you're going with me, Cole, like a sensible chap." I shook my head. "Only on the one condition." "You stick to that?" he said, so rapidly that the words ran into one, so fiercely that his decision was as plain to me as my own. "I do," said I, and could only sigh when he made yet one more effort to persuade me, in a distress not less apparent than his resolution, and not less becoming in him. "Consider, Cole, consider." "I have already done so, Rattray. Murder is simply nothing to them." "It is nothing to me either." "Human life is nothing." "No, it must end one day." "You won't give your word unconditionally?" "No. You know my condition." He ignored it with a blazing eye, his hand upon the door. "You prefer to die, then?" "Infinitely." "Then die you may, and be damned to you." This is the end of chapter 16.
Chapter 17 of Dead Men Tell No Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Susan Umpleby. Dead Men Tell No Tales by E. W. Hornung. Chapter 17. Thieves Fall Out. The door slammed. It was invisibly locked and the key taken out. I listened for the last of an angry stride. It never even began. But after a pause the door was unlocked again, and Rattray re-entered. Without looking at me, he snatched the candle from the table on which it stood by the bedside, and carried it to a bureau at the opposite side of the room. There he stood a minute with his back turned, the candle, I fancy, on the floor. I saw him putting something in either jacket pocket. Then I heard a dull little snap, as though he had shut some small morocco case. Whatever it was, he tossed it carelessly back into the bureau, and next minute he was really gone, leaving the candle burning on the floor. I lay and heard his steps out of earshot, and they were angry enough now, nor had he given me a single glance. I listened until there was no more to be heard, and then in an instant I was off the bed and on my feet. I reeled a little, and my head gave me great pain, but greater still was my excitement. I caught up the candle, opened the unlocked bureau, and then the empty case, which I found in the very front. My heart leapt. There was no mistaking the depressions in the case. It was a brace of tiny pistols that Rattray had slipped into his jacket pockets. Mere toys they must have been in comparison with my dear Deane and Adams. That mattered nothing. I went no longer in dire terror of my life. Indeed, there was that in Rattray which had left me feeling fairly safe, in spite of his last words to me, albeit I felt his fears on my behalf to be genuine enough. His taking these little pistols (of course there were but 3 chambers left loaded in mine) confirmed my confidence in him. He would stick at nothing to defend me from the violence of his bloodthirsty accomplices. But it should not come to that. My legs were growing firmer under me. I was not going to lie there meekly without making at least an effort at self-deliverance. If it succeeded, the idea came to me in a flash, I would send Rattray an ultimatum from the nearest town, and either Eva should be set instantly and unconditionally free, or the whole matter be put unreservedly in the hands of the local police. There were 2 lattice windows, both in the same immensely thick wall. To my joy I discovered that they overlooked the open premises at the back of the hall, with the oak plantation beyond; nor was the distance to the ground very great. It was the work of a moment to tear the sheets from the bed, to tie the 2 ends together, and a third round the mullion by which the larger window was bisected. I had done this, and had let down my sheets, when a movement below turned my heart to ice. The night had clouded over. I could see nobody; so much the greater was my alarm. I withdrew from the window, leaving the sheets hanging, in the hope that they also might be invisible in the darkness. I put out the candle, and returned to the window in great perplexity. Next moment I stood aghast, between the devil and the deep sea. I still heard a something down below, but a worse sound came to drown it. An unseen hand was very quietly trying the door, which Rattray had locked behind him. "Diablo!" came to my horrified ears, in a soft, vindictive voice. "I told you so," muttered another. "The young swab's got the key." There was a pause, in which it would seem that Joaquin Santos had his ear at the empty keyhole. "I think he must be slipping," at last I heard him sigh. "It was not necessary to awaken him in this world. It is a pity." "One kick over the lock would do it," said Harris. "Only the young swab'll hear." "Not, perhaps, while he is dancing attendance on the Senhora. Was it not good to send him to her? If he does hear, well, his own turn will come the queecker, that is all. But it would be better to take them one at a time. So keek away, my friend, and I will give him no time to squill." While my would-be murderers were holding this whispered colloquy, I had stood half petrified by the open window, unwilling to slide down the sheets into the arms of an unseen enemy, though I had no idea which of them it could be; more hopeful of slipping past my butchers in the darkness, and so to Rattray and poor Eva, but not the less eagerly looking for some hiding place in the room. The best that offered was a recess in the thick wall between the 2 windows, filled with hanging clothes, a narrow closet without a door, which would shelter me well enough if not too curiously inspected. Here I hid myself in the end, after a moment of indecision which nearly cost me my life. The coats and trousers still shook in front of me when the door flew open at the first kick, and Santos stood a moment in the moonlight, looking for the bed. With a stride he reached it, and I saw the gleam of a knife from where I stood among the squire's clothes. It flashed over my bed and was still. "He is not here." "He heard us, and he's a hiding." "Make light, my friend, and we will very soon see." Harris did so. "Here's a candle," said Santos. "Light it, and watch the door. Pero maldicto! What have we here?" I felt certain he had seen me, but the candle passed within a yard of my feet and was held on high at the open window. "We are too late," said Santos. "He's gone." "Are you sure?" "Look at this sheet." "Then the other swab knew of it, and we'll settle with him." "Yes, yes, but not yet, my good friend, not yet. We want his assistance in getting the gold back to the sea. He will be glad enough to give it, now that his pet bird has flown. After that, by all means. You shall cut his throat, and I will put one of his dear friend's bullets in him, for my own satisfaction." There was a quick step on the stairs in the corridor. "I'd like to do it now," whispered Harris. "No time like the present." "Not yet, I tell you." And Rattray was in the room, a silver-mounted pistol in each hand. The sight of these was a surprise to his treacherous confederates, as even I could see. "What the devil are you two doing here?" he thundered. "We thought he was too quiet," said Santos. "You perceive the reason." And he waved from empty bed to open window, then held the candle close to the tied sheet, and shrugged expressively. "You thought he was too quiet!" echoed Rattray with fierce scorn. "You thought I was too blind, that's what you mean. To tell me that Miss Denison wished to see me, and Miss Denison that I wished to speak to her. As if we shouldn't find you out in about a minute. But a minute was better than nothing, eh? And you've made good use of your minute, have you? You've murdered him, and you pretend he's got out? By God, if you have, I'll murder you. I've been ready for this all night." And he stood with his back to the window, his pistols raised, and his head carried proudly, happily, like a man whose self-respect was coming back to him after many days. Harris shrank before his fierce eyes and pointed barrels. The Portuguese, however, had merely given a characteristic shrug, and was now rolling the inevitable cigarette. "Your common sense is almost as remarkable as your sense of justice, my friend," said he. "You see us 1, 2, 3 minutes ago, and you see us now. You see the empty bed, the empty room, and you imagine that in 1, 2, 3 minutes we have killed a man and disposed of his body. Truly, you are very wise and just, and very loyal also to your friends. You treat a dangerous enemy as though he were your twin brother. You let him escape, let him, I repeat. And then you threaten to shoot those who, as it is, may pay for your carelessness with their lives. We have always been very loyal to you, Senhor Rattray. We have listened to your advice, and often taken it against our better judgment. We are here not because we think it wise, but because you wished it. Yet at the first temptation you turn upon us. You point your pistols at your friends." "I don't believe in your loyalty," rejoined Rattray. "I believe you would shoot me sooner than I would you. The only difference would be that I should be shot in the back." "It is untrue," said Santos with immense emotion. "I call the saints to witness that never by thought or word have I been disloyal to you." And the blasphemous wretch actually crossed himself with a trembling skinny hand. "I have listened to you, though you are the younger man. I have given way to you in everything from the moment we were so foolish as to set foot on this accursed coast. That also was your doing, and it will be your fault if evil comes of it. Yet I have not complained. Here in your own house you have been the master, I the guest. So far from plotting against you, show me the man who has heard me breath one treacherous word behind your back. You will find it difficult, friend Rattray. What do you say, captain?" "Me!" cried Harris, in a voice bursting with abuse. And what the captain said may or may not be imagined. It cannot be set down. But the man who ought to have spoken, the man who had such a chance as few men have off the stage, who could have confounded these villains in a breath, and saved the wretched Rattray at once from them and from himself, that unheroic hero remained ignobly silent in his homely hiding place. And what is more, he would do the same again. The rogues had fallen out. Now was the time for honest men. They all thought I had escaped. Therefore they would give me a better chance than ever of still escaping. And I have already explained to what purpose I meant to use my first hours of liberty. That purpose I hold to have justified any ingratitude that I may seem now to have displayed towards the man who had undoubtedly stood between death and me. Was not Eva Denison of more value than many Rattrays? And it was precisely in relation with this pure young girl that I most mistrusted the squire. Obviously, then, my first duty was to save Eva from Rattray, not Rattray from these traitors. Not that I pretend for a moment to have been the thing I never was. You are not so very grateful to the man who pulls you out of the mud, when he has first of all pushed you in. Nor is it chivalry alone which spurs one to the rescue of a lovely lady for whom, after all, one would rather live than die. Thus I, in my corner, was thinking, I will say, of Eva first, but next I was thinking of myself, and Rattray's blood be on his own hot head. I hold, moreover, that I was perfectly right in all this, but if any think me very wrong, a sufficient satisfaction is in store for them, for I was very swiftly punished. The captain's language was no worse in character than in effect. The bed was bloody from my wounded head, all tumbled from the haste with which I had quitted it, and only too suggestive of still fouler play. Rattray stopped the captain with a sudden flourish of one of his pistols, the silver mountings making lightning in the room. Then he called upon the pair of them to show him what they had done with me, and to my horror Santos invited him to search the room. The invitation was accepted, yet there I stood. It would have been better to step forward even then, yet I cowered among his clothes until his own hand fell upon my collar, and forth I was dragged to the plain amazement of all three. Santos was the first to find his voice. "Another time you will perhaps think twice before you spik, friend squire." Rattray simply asked me what I had been doing in there, in a white flame of passion, and with such an oath that I embellished the truth for him in my turn. "Trying to give you blackguards the slip," said I. "Then it was you who let down the sheet?" "Of course it was." "All right. I'm done with you," said he. "That settles it. I make you an offer. You won't accept it. I do my best. You do your worst. But I'll be shot if you get another chance from me." Brandy and the wine glass stood where Rattray must have set them, on an oak stool beside the bed. As he spoke he crossed the room, filled the glass till the spirit dripped, and drained it at a gulp. He was twitching and wincing still when he turned, walked up to Joaquin Santos, and pointed to where I stood with a fist that shook. "You wanted to deal with him," said Rattray. "You're at liberty to do so. I'm only sorry I stood in your way." But no answer, and for once no rings of smoke came from those shrivelled lips. The man had rolled and lighted a cigarette since Rattray entered, but it was burning unheeded between his skinny fingers. I had his attention all to myself. He knew the tale that I was going to tell. He was waiting for it. He was ready for me. The attentive droop of his head, the crafty glitter in his intelligent eyes, the depth and breadth of the creased forehead, the knowledge of his resource, the consciousness of my error, all distracted and confounded me, so that my speech halted and my voice ran thin. I told Rattray every syllable that these traitors had been saying behind his back, but I told it all very ill. What was worse, and made me worse, I was only too well aware of my own failure to carry conviction with my words. "And why couldn't you come out and say so?" asked Rattray, as even I knew that he must. "Why wait till now?" "Ah, why?" echoed Santos, with a smile and a shake of the head, a suspicious tolerance, an ostentatious truce, upon his parchment face; and already he was sufficiently relieved to suck his cigarette alight again. "You know why," I said, trusting to bluff honesty with the one of them who was not rotten to the core. "Because I still meant escaping." "And then what?" asked Rattray fiercely. "You had given me my chance," I said. "I would have given you yours." "You would you? Very kind of you, Mr. Cole." "No, no," said Santos. "Not kind, but clever. Clever, spicious, and quick-witted beyond belief. Senhor Rattray, we have all been in the dark. We thought we had fool to deal with. But what admirable name the young man would make! Such readiness, such resource, with his tongue or with his pistol! How useful would it be to us! I am glad you have decided to leave him to me, friend Rattray, for I am quite come round to your way of thinking. It is no longer necessary for him to die." "You mean that?" cried Rattray keenly. "Of course I mean it. You were quite right. He must join us. But he will when I talk to him." I could not speak. I was fascinated by this wretch. It was reptile and rabbit with us. Treachery I knew he meant; my death for one. My death was certain, and yet I could not speak. "Then talk to him, for God's sake!" cried Rattray. "And I shall be only too glad if you can talk some sense into him. I've tried and failed." "I shall not fail," said Santos softly. "But it is better that he has a leetle time to think over it calmly. Better steal for him to slip upon it, as you say. Let us leave him for the night, what there is of it. Time enough in the morning." I could hardly believe my ears. Still I knew that it was treachery, all treachery, and the morning I should never see. "But we can't leave him up here," said Rattray. "It would mean one of us watching him all night." "Quite so," said Santos. "I will tell you where we could leave him. However, if you will allow me to whisper one leetle moment." They drew aside, and as I live, I thought that little moment was to be Rattray's last on earth. I watched, but nothing happened. On the contrary, both men seemed agreed, the Portuguese gesticulating, the Englishman nodding, as they stood conversing at the window. Their faces were strangely reassuring. I began to reason with myself, to rid my mind of mere presentiment and superstition. If these two were really at one about me, I argued, there might be no treachery after all. When I came to think of it, Rattray had been closeted long enough with me to awake the worst suspicions in the breast of his companions. Now that these were allayed, there might be no more bloodshed after all, if, for example, I pretended to give in, even though Santos had not cared whose blood was shed a few minutes since. That was evidently the character of the wretch. To compass his needs, or to defend his person, he would take life with no more compunction than the ordinary criminal takes money; but, and hence, murder for murder's sake was no amusement to him. My confidence was further restored by Captain Harris. Ever a gross ruffian, with no refinements to his rascality, he had been at the brandy bottle after Rattray's example, and now was dozing on the ladder's bed, taking his watch below when he could get it, like the good seaman he had been. I was quite sorry for him when the conversation at the window ceased suddenly, and Rattray roused the captain up. "Watches aft," said he. "We want that mattress. You can bring it along, while I lead the way with the pillows and things. Come on, Cole." "Where to?" I asked, standing firm. "Where there's no window for you to jump out of, old boy, and no clothes of mine for you to hide behind. You needn't look so scared. It's as dry as a bone, as cellars go, and it's past 3 o'clock, and you've just got to come." End of chapter 17.
Of Dead Men Tell No Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. Reading by Mary Rhodey. Dead Men Tell No Tales by E.W. Hornung. Chapter 18. A Man of Many Murders. It was a good-sized wine cellar, with very little wine in it. Only one full bin could I discover. The bins themselves lined but 2 of the walls, and most of them were covered in with cobwebs, close drawn, like mosquito curtains. The ceiling was all too low. Torpid spiders hung in disreputable parlors, dead to the eye, but loathsomely alive at an involuntary touch. Rats scuttled when we entered, and I had not been long alone when they returned to bear me company. I am not a natural historian, and had rather face a lion with the right rifle than a rat with a stick. My jailers, however, had been kind enough to leave me a lantern, which, set upon the ground, like my mattress, would afford a warning, if not a protection, against the worst, unless I slept. And as yet I had not lain down. The rascals had been considerate enough, more especially Santos, who had a new manner for me with his revised opinion of my character. It was a manner almost as courtly as that which embellished his relations with Eva Denison, and won him my early regard at sea. Moreover, it was at the suggestion of Santos that they had detained me in the hall for much needed meat and drink on the way down. Thereafter they had conducted me through the book-lined door of my undoing, down stone stairs leading to 3 cellar doors, one of which they had double-locked upon me. As soon as I durst I was busy with this door, but to no purpose. It was a slab of solid oak, hung on hinges as massive as its lock. It galled me to think that but 2 doors stood between me and the secret tunnel to the sea, for one of the other 2 must lead to it. The first, however, was all beyond me, and I very soon gave it up. There was also a very small grating which let in a very little fresh air. The massive foundations had been tunnelled in one place. A rude alcove was the result, with this grating at the end and top of it, some 7 feet above the earth floor. Even had I been able to wrench away the bars, it would have availed me nothing, since the aperture formed the segment of a circle, whose chord was but a very few inches long. I had nevertheless a fancy for seeing the stars once more, and feeling the breath of heaven upon my bandaged temples, which impelled me to search for that which should add a cubit to my stature. And at a glance I descried 2 packing cases, rather small and squat, but the pair of them together the very thing for me. To my amazement, however, I could at first move neither one nor the other of these small boxes. Was it that I was weak as water, or that they were heavier than lead? At last I managed to get one of them in my arms, only to drop it with a thud. A side started. A thin sprinkling of yellow dust glittered on the earth. I fetched a lantern. It was gold dust from the Bendigo or from Ballarat. To me there was horror unspeakable, yet withal a morbid fascination, in the spectacle of the actual booty for which so many lives had been sacrificed before my eyes. Minute followed minute in which I looked at nothing,
and could think of nothing but the stolen bullion at my feet. Then I gathered what of the dust I could, pocketed it in pinches to hide my meddlesomeness, and blew the rest away. The box had dropped very much where I had found it. It had exhausted my strength none the less, and I was glad at last to lie down on the mattress and to wind my body in rat-race blankets. I shuddered at the thought of sleep. The rats became so lively the moment I lay still. One ventured so near as to sit up close to the lantern. The light showed its fat white belly, and the thing itself was like a dog begging, as big to my disgusted eyes. And yet, in the midst of these horrors, to me as bad as any that had preceded them, nature overcame me, and for a space my torment ceased. "He is asleep," a soft voice said. "Don't wake the poor devil," said another. "But I wish to speak with him. Senator Cole, Senator Cole." I opened my eyes. Santos looked of uncanny stature in the low yellow light from my pillow close to the earth. Harris turned away at my glance. He carried a spade and began digging near the boxes without more ado, by the light of a second lantern set on one of them. His back was to me from this time on. Santos shrugged a shoulder towards the captain as he opened a camp stool, drew up his trousers, and seated himself with much deliberation at the foot of my mattress. "When you have treasure," said he, "the better thing is to bury it, Senator Cole. Our young friend upstairs begs to differ, but he is slipping. It is pity he takes such quantity of brandy. It is little weakness of you English. We in Portugal never touch it, save as a liqueur. Therefore we require less slip. Friend Squire upstairs is at this moment no better than a porker." Have I made a mistake? I thought it was the same word in both languages. But I am glad to see you smile, Senator Cole. That is a good sign. I was going to say, he is so fast asleep up there that he would not hear us if we were to shoot each other dead. And he gave me his paternal smile, benevolent, humorous, reassuring. But I was no longer reassured, nor did I greatly care any more what happened to me. There is a point of last, as well as one of least, resistance, and I had reached both points at once. "Have you shot him dead?" I inquired, thinking that if he had, this would precipitate my turn. But he was far from angry. The parchment face crumpled into tolerant smiles. The venerable head shook a playful reproval as he threw away the cigarette that I am tired of mentioning, and put the last touch to a fresh one with his tongue. "What question, eh?" said he. "Really, Senator Cole, but you are quite right. I would have shot him, or cut his throat," and he shrugged indifference on the point, "if it had not been for you, and yet it would have been your fault. I need not explain. The position must have explained itself already. Besides, it is past. With you two against us, but it is past. You see, I have no longer the excellent Jose. You broke his leg, bad man. I fear it will be necessary to destroy him." Santos made a pause, then inquired if he shocked me. "Not a bit," said I, "neither truly nor untruly. You interest me." And that he did. "You see," he continued, "I have not the respect of you English for human life. We will not argue it. I have at least some respect for prejudice. In my youth I had myself such prejudices, but one loses them on the Zambesi. You cannot expect one to set any value upon the life of a black nigger, and when you have killed a great many Kaffirs by the lash with the crocodiles, or what not, then a white man or two makes less difference. I acknowledge there were too many on board that ship, but what was one to do? You have your English proverb about the dead men and the stories. It was necessary to make clean sweep. You see the result." He shrugged again towards the boxes, but this time, being reminded of them, I supposed, he rose and went over to see how Harris was progressing. The captain had never looked round, neither did he look at Santos. "A leetle dipper," I heard the latter say, "and perhaps a few inches," but I lost the last epithet. It followed a glance over the shoulder in my direction, and immediately preceded the return of Santos to his camp stool. "Yes, it is always better to bury treasure," said he once more, but his tone was altered. It was more contemplative, and many smoke rings came from the shrunk lips before another word. But through them all, his dark eyes, dull with age, were fixed upon me. "You are a treasure," he exclaimed at last, softly enough, but quickly and emphatically for him, and with a sudden and most diabolical smile. "So you are going to bury me. I had suspected it when first I saw the spade, then not, but since the visit to the hole I had made up my mind to it." "Bury you? No, not alive," said Santos in his playfully reproving tone. "It would be necessary to dig so deep," he added through his few remaining teeth. "Well," I said, "you'll swing for it. That's something." Santos smiled again, benignantly enough this time, in contemplation also, as an artist smiles upon his work. I was his. "You live town," said he. "No one knows where you go. You come down here. No one knows who you are. Your dear friend Squire locks you up for the night, but he drinks too much and goes to sleep with the key in his pocket. It is there when he wakes. But the prisoner, where is he? He is gone, vanished, escaped in the night, and, like the base fabrique of your own poet's vision, he leaves no trace. Is it trace? Behind. A little earth is so easily bitten down, a little more is so easily carried up into the garden, and a bead of nice strong wire might so easily be found in a cellar, and afterwards in the lock. No, Senhor Cole, I do not expect to hang. My skims have seldom one single flaw. There was just one in the Lady Jermyn. There was, Senhor Cole. If there is one this time, and you will be so kind as to point it out, I will run the risk of shooting you instead of—" A pinch of his baggy throat between the fingers and thumbs of both hands foreshadowed a cleaner end. And yet I could look at him. Nay, it was more than I could do not to look upon that bloodless face, with the 2 dry blots upon the parchment that were never withdrawn from mine. "No, you won't, messmate. If it's him or us for it, let a bullet do it, and let it do it quick, you bloody Spaniard. You can't do the other without me, and my part's done." Harris was my only hope. I had seen this from the first, but my appeal I had been keeping to the very end, and now he was leaving me before a word would come. Santos had gone over to my grave, and there was Harris at the door. "It is not deep enough," said the Portuguese. "It's as deep as I mean to make it, with you sitting there talking about it." And the door stood open. "Captain!" I screamed. "For Christ's sake, Captain!" He stood there, trembling, yet even now not looking my way. "Did you ever see a man hanged?" asked Santos, with a vile eye for each of us. "I once hanged 15 in a row. Abominable thieves! And I once poisoned nearly 100 at one banquet. An untrustworthy tribe. But the hanging was the worst sight and the worst death. Whew! There was one man, he was no stouter than you are, Captain—" But the door slammed. We heard the captain on the stairs. There was a rustle from the leaves outside, and then a silence that I shall not attempt to describe. And, indeed, I am done with this description. As I live to tell the tale, or spoil it if I choose, I will make shorter work of this particular business than I found it at the time. Perverse I may be in old age as in my youth. But on that my agony, my humiliating agony, I decline to dwell. I suffer it afresh as I write. There are the cobwebs on the ceiling, a bloated spider crawling in one. A worse monster is gloating over me, those dull eyes of his, and my own pistol barrel cover me in the lamplight. The crucifix pin is awry in his cravat. That is because he has offered it to me to kiss. As a refinement, I feel sure, my revolver is not cocked, and the hammer goes up, up. He missed me because a lantern was flashed into his eyes through the grating. He wasted the next ball in firing wildly at the light, and the last chamber's load became suddenly too precious for my person, for there were many voices overhead, there were many feet upon the stairs. Harris came first, head first, saw me still living as he reeled, hurled himself upon the boxes, and one of these into the hole. All far quicker than my pen can write it. The maneuver, being the captain's, explained itself. On his heels trod Rattray, with one who brought me to my feet like the call of silver trumpets. "The house is surrounded," said the squire, very quick and quiet. "Is this your doing, Cole?" "I wish it was," said I, "but I can't complain. It saved my life." And I looked at Santos standing dignified and alert, my still smoking pistol in his hand. "Two things to do," said Rattray. "I don't care which." He strode across the cellar and pulled at the one full bin. Something slid out. It was a binful of empty bottles, and this time they were allowed to crash upon the floor. The squire stood pointing to a manhole at the back of the bin. "That's one alternative," said he, "but it will mean leaving this much stuff at least," pointing to the boxes, "and probably all the rest at the other end. The other thing's to stop and fight." "I fight," said Santos, stalking to the door. "Have you no more ammunition for me, friend Cole? Then I must leave you alive. Adios, senhor." Harris cast a wistful look towards the manhole, not in cowardice, I fancy, but in sudden longing for the sea, the longing of a poor devil of a sailor man doomed to die ashore. I am still sorry to remember that Rattray judged him differently. "Come on, skipper," said he. "It's all or none aboard the lugger, and I think it will be none. Up you go. Wait a second in the room above, and I'll find you an old cutlass. I shan't be longer." He turned to me with a wry smile. "We're not half armed," he said. "They've caught us fairly on the hop. It should be fun. Good-bye, Cole. I wish you'd had another round for that revolver. Good-bye, Eva." And he held out his hand to our love, who had been watching him all this time with eyes of stone. But now she turned her back upon him without a word. His face changed. The stormlight of passion and remorse played upon it for an instant. He made a step towards her, wheeled abruptly, and took me by the shoulder instead. "Take care of her, Cole," said he. "Whatever happens, take care of her." I caught him at the foot of the stairs. I do not defend what I did, but I had more ammunition, a few wadded bullets, caps, and powder charges loose in a jacket pocket, and I thrust them into one of his, upon a sudden impulse, not, as I think, altogether unaccountable, albeit, as I have said, so indefensible. My back was hardly turned an instant. I had left a statue of unforgiving coldness. I started round to catch in my arms a half-fainting, grief-stricken form, shaken with sobs that it broke my heart to hear. I placed her on the camp stool. I knelt down and comforted her as well as I could, stroking her hands, my arms about her heaving shoulders, with the gold-brown hair streaming over them. Such hair as it was, so much longer than I had dreamt, so soft, so fine. My soul swam in the sight and touch of it. Well for me that there broke upon us from above such a sudden din as turned my hot blood cold. a wild shout of surprise, an ensuing roar of defiance, shrieks and curses, yells of rage and pain, and pistol shot after pistol shot as loud as cannon in the confined space. I know now that the battle in the hall was a very brief affair. While it lasted I have no sense of time, minutes or moments. They were, God forgive me, some of the very happiest in all my life. My joy was as profound as it was also selfish and incongruous. The villains were being routed, of that there could be no doubt or question. I hoped Rattray might escape, but for the others no pity stirred in my heart, and even my sneaking sympathy with the squire could take nothing from the joy that was in my heart. Eva Denison was free. I was free. Our oppressors would trouble us no more. We were both lonely. We were both young. We had suffered together and for each other. And here she lay in my arms, her head upon my shoulder, her soft bosom heaving on my own. My blood ran hot and cold by turns. I forgot everything but our freedom and my love. I forgot my sufferings, as I would have you all forget them. I am not to be pitied. I have been in heaven on earth. I was there that night, in my great bodily weakness, and in the midst of bloodshed, death, and crime. "They have stopped," cried Eva suddenly. "It is over. Oh, if he is dead!" And she sat upright, with bright eyes starting from a deathly face. I do not think she knew that she had been in my arms at all, any more than I knew that the firing had ceased before she told me. Excited voices were still raised overhead, but some sounded distant, yet more distinct, coming through the grating from the garden. And none were voices that we knew. One poor wretch, on the other hand, we heard plainly groaning to his death, and we looked in each other's eyes with the same thought. "That's Harris," said I, with, I fear, but little compassion in my tone or in my heart just then. "Where are the others?" cried Eva piteously. "God knows," said I. "They may be done for too." "If they are!" "It's better than the death they would have lived to die." "But only one of them was a wilful murderer. Oh, Mr. Cole, Mr. Cole, go and see what has happened. Come back and tell me. I dare not come. I will stay here and pray for the strength to bear whatever news you may bring me. Go quickly. I will wait and pray." So I left the poor child on her knees in that vile cellar, white face and straining hands uplifted to the foul ceiling, sweet lips quivering with prayer, eyelids reverently lowered, and the swift tears flowing from beneath them, all in the yellow light of the lantern that stood burning by her side. How different a picture from that which awaited me overhead. End of chapter 18.
No Tales by E.W. Hornung, Chapter 19. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Craig S. Werner of Tidewater, Virginia. Dead Men Tell No Tales by E.W. Hornung, Chapter 19. My Greatest Hour. The library doors were shut, and I closed the secret one behind me before opening the other and peering out through a rack of bluish smoke. And there lay Captain Harris, sure enough, breathing his last in the arms of one constable, while another was seated on the table with a very wry face, twisting a tourniquet around his arm from which the blood was dripping like raindrops from the eaves. A third officer stood in the porch, issuing directions to his men without. "He's over the wall, I tell you. I saw him run up our ladder. After him, every man of you, and spread." I looked in vain for Rattray and the rest, yet it seemed as if only one of them had escaped. I was still looking when the man in the porch wheeled back into the hall and instantly caught sight of me at my door. "Hello, here's another of them," cried he. Out you come, young fellow. Your mates are all dead men. They're not my mates. Never mind. Come you out, and let's have a look at you. I did so, and was confronted by a short, thick-set man, who recognized me with a smile, but whom I failed to recognize. I might have guessed it was Mr. Cole, said he. I knew you were here somewhere, but I couldn't make head or tail of you through the smoke. I'm surprised that you could make head or tail of me at all, said I. Then you've quite forgotten the inquisitive parson you met out fishing? You see, I found out your name for myself. So it was a detective. It was and is, said the little man, nodding. Detective, or Inspector Royds, if you're any the wiser. What has happened? Who has escaped? Your friend Rattray, but he won't get far. What of the Portuguese and the nigger? I forgot that I had crippled Jose, but remembered with my words, and wondered the more where he was. I'll show you, said Royds. It was the nigger let us in. We heard him groaning round at the back. Who smashed his leg? One of our men was at that cellar grating. There was some of them down there. We wanted to find our way down and corner them, but the fat got in the fire too soon. Can you stand something strong? Then come this way. He led me out into the garden, and to a tangled heap lying in the moonlight on the edge of the long grass. The slave had fallen on top of his master. One leg lay swathed and twisted. One black hand had but partially relaxed upon the haft of the knife that stood up hilt deep in a blacker heart, and in the hand of Santos was still the revolver, my Dean and Adams, which had sent its last ball through the nigger's body. They slipped out behind us, all but the one inside, said Royds ruefully. I'm hanged if I know yet how it happened, but we were on them next second. Before that, the nigger had made us hide him in the grass, but the old devil ran straight into him, and the one fired as the other struck. It's the worst bit of luck in the whole business, and I'm rather disappointed on the whole. I've been nursing the job all this week, had my last look round this very evening with one of these officers, and only rode back for more to make sure of taking our gentleman alive. And we've lost 3 out of 4 of 'em, and have still to lay hands on the gold. I suppose you didn't know there was any aboard, he asked abruptly. Not before tonight. Nor did we, till the Devoren came in with letters last week. 130 days out. She should have been in a month before you, but she got amongst the ice around the Horn. There was a letter of advice about the gold, saying it would probably go in the Lady Jermyn, and another about Rattray and his schooner, which had just sailed. The young gentleman was known to the police out there. Do you know where the schooner is? Bless you, no. We've had no time to think about her. The man has been seen about town, and we've done well to lay hands on him in the time. You will do better still when you do lay hands on him, said I, resting my eyes from the yellow dead face of the foreign scoundrel. The moon shone full upon his high forehead, his shriveled lips, dank in their death agony, and on the bauble with the sacred device that he wore always in his tie. I recovered my property from the shrunken fingers, and so turned away with a harder heart than I ever had before or since for any creature of Almighty God. Harris had expired in our absence. Never spoke, sir, said the constable in whose arms we had left him. More's the pity. Well, cut out at the back and help land the young gent, or we'll have him giving us the slip too. He may double back, but I'm watching out for that. Which way should you say he'd head, Mr. Cole? Inland, said I, lying on the spur of the moment, I knew not why. Try at the cottage where I've been staying. We have a man posted there already. That woman is one of the gang, and we've got her safe. But I'll take your advice and have that side scoured whilst I hang about the place. And he walked through the house and out the back way, at the officer's heels. Meanwhile the man with the wounded arm was swaying where he sat from loss of blood, and I had to help him into the open air before at last I was free to return to poor Eva in her place of loathsome safety. I had been so long, however, that her patience was exhausted, and as I returned to the library by one door, she entered by the other. I could bear it no longer. Tell me the worst. 3 of them are dead. Which 3? She had crossed to the other door, and would not have me shut it, so I stood between her and the hearth on which lay the captain's corpse, with the hearthrug turned up on either side to cover it. Harris, for one, said I. Outside lay Jose and, quick, quick, Senor Santos. Her face was as though the name meant nothing to her. And Mr. Rattray, she cried, and Mr. Rattray has escaped for the present. He seems to have cut his way through the police and got over the wall by a ladder they left behind them. They are scouring the country. Miss Denison, Eva, my poor love. She had broken down utterly in a second fit of violent weeping, and a second time I took her in my arms and stood trying in my clumsy way to comfort her, as though she were a little child. A lamp was burning in the library, and I recognized the armchair which Rattray had drawn thence for me on the night of our dinner, the very night before. I led Eva back into the room, and I closed both doors. I supported my poor girl to the chair, and once more I knelt before her and took her hands in mine. My great hour was come at last. Surely a happy omen that it was also the hour before the dawn. Cry your fill, my darling, I whispered, with the tears in my own voice. You shall never have anything more to cry for in this world. God has been very good to us. He brought you to me and me to you. He has rescued us for each other. All our troubles are over. Cry your fill. You will never have another chance so long as I live, if only you will let me live for you. Will you, Eva? Will you? Will you? She drew her hands from mine and sat upright in the chair, looking at me with round eyes. But mine were dim. Astonishment was all that I could read in her look, and on I went headlong, with growing impetus and passion. I know I am not much, my darling, but you know I was not always what my luck, good and bad, has left me now. And you will make a new man of me soon. Besides, God must mean it, or he would not have thrown us together amid such horrors, and brought us through them together still. And you have no one else to take care of you in the world. Won't you let me try, Eva? Say that you will. Then you love me? She said slowly, in a low, awe-struck voice that might have told me my fate at once. But I was shaking all over in the intensity of my passion, and for the moment it was joy enough to be able at last to tell her all. Love you, I echoed, with every fibre of my being, with every atom of my heart and soul and body. I love you well enough to live to 100 for you, or to die for you tonight. Well enough to give me up, she whispered. I felt as though a cold hand had checked my heart at its hottest, but I mastered myself sufficiently to face her question and to answer it as honestly as I might. Yes, I cried, well enough even to do that, if it was for your happiness, but I might be rather difficult to convince about that. You are very strong and true, she murmured. Yes, I can trust you as I have never trusted anybody else, but how long have you been so foolish? And she tried very hard to smile. Since I first saw you, but I only knew it on the night of the fire. Till that night I resisted it like an idiot. Do you remember how we used to argue? I rebelled so against my love. I imagined that I had loved once already, and once for all. But on the night of the fire I knew that my love for you was different from all that had gone before or would ever come again. I gave in to it at last, and oh, the joy of giving in! I had fought against the greatest blessing of my life, and I never knew it till I had given up fighting. What did I care about the fire? I was never happier until now. You sang through my heart like the wind through the rigging. My one fear was that I might go to the bottom without telling you my love. When I asked to say a few last words to you on the poop, it was to tell you my love before we parted, that you might know I loved you whatever came. I didn't do so because you seemed so frightened, poor darling. I hadn't it in my heart to add to your distress. So I left you without a word. But I fought the sea for days together, simply to tell you what I couldn't die without telling you. When they picked me up, It was your name that brought back my senses after days of delirium. When I heard that you were dead, I longed to die myself. And when I found you lived after all, the horror of your surroundings was nothing to be compared with the mere fact that you lived. That you were unhappy and in danger was my only grief, but it was nothing to the thought of your death. And that I had to wait 24 hours without coming to you drove me nearer to madness than ever I was on the hen coop. That's how I love you, Eva, I concluded. That's how I love and will love you forever and ever, no matter what happens. Those sweet gray eyes of hers had been fixed very steadily upon me all through this outburst. As I finished, they filled with tears, and my poor love sat wringing her slender fingers and upbraiding herself as though she were the most heartless coquette in the country. "How wicked I am," she moaned. "How ungrateful I must be. You offer me the unselfish love of a strong, brave man. I cannot take it. I have no love to give you in return." "But some day you may," I urged, quite happily in my ignorance. "It will come. Oh, surely it will come, after all that we have gone through together." She looked at me very steadily and kindly through her tears. "It has come in a way," said she, "but is not your way, Mr. Cole. I do love you for your bravery and your love, but that will not quite do for either of us." "Why not?" I cried in ecstasy. "My darling, it will do for me. It is more than I dared to hope for. Thank God, that you should care for me at all." She shook her head. "You do not understand," she whispered. I do. You do not love me as you want to love." "As I could love." "And as you will. It will come. It will come. I'll bother you no more about it now. God knows I can afford to leave well alone. I am only too happy, too thankful, as it is." And indeed I rose to my feet, every whit as joyful as though she had accepted me on the spot. At least she had not rejected me. Nay, she confessed to loving me in a way. What more could a lover want? Yet there was a dejection in her drooping attitude which disconcerted me in the hour of my reward. And her eyes followed me with a kind of stony remorse which struck a chill to my bleeding heart. I went to the door. The hall was still empty, and I shut it again with a shudder at what I saw before the hearth, at all that I had forgotten in the little library. As I turned, another door opened, the door made invisible by the multitude of books around and upon it, and young Squire Rattray stood between my love and me. His clear, smooth skin was almost as pale as Eva's own, but pale brown, the tint of rich ivory. His eyes were preternaturally bright, and they never glanced my way, but flew straight to Eva, and rested on her very humbly and sadly, as her two hands gripped the arms of the chair, and she leant forward in horror and alarm. "How could you come back?" she cried. "I was told you had escaped." "Yes, I got away on one of their horses. I pictured you safe on board." "I very nearly was." "Then why are you here?" "To get your forgiveness before I go." He took a step forward. Her eyes and mine were riveted upon him, and I still wonder which of us admired him the more, as he stood there in his pride and his humility, gallant and young, and yet shamefaced and sad. "You risk your life for my forgiveness?" whispered Eva at last. "Risk it? I'll give myself up if you'll take back some of the things you said to me last night and before." There was a short pause. "Well, you are not a coward at all events." "Nor a murderer, Eva." "God forbid." "Then forgive me everything else that I have been to you." And he was on his knees where I had knelt scarce a minute before. Nor could I bear to watch them any longer. I believed that he loved her in his own way as sincerely as I did in mine. I believed that she detested him for the detestable crime in which he had been concerned. I believed that the opinion of him which she had expressed to his face in my hearing was her true opinion, and I longed to hear her mitigate it ever so little before he went. He won my sympathy as a gallant who valued a kind word from his mistress more than life itself. I hoped earnestly that that kind word would be spoken, but I had no desire to wait to hear it. I felt an intruder. I would leave them alone together for the last time. So I walked to the door, but seeing a key in it, I changed my mind, and locked it on the inside. In the hall I might become the unintentional instrument of the squire's capture, though, so far as my ears served me, it was still empty as we had left it. I preferred to run no risks, and would have a look at the subterranean passage instead. "I advise you to speak low," I said, "and not to be long. The place is alive with the police. If they hear you all will be up." Whether he heard me I do not know. I left him on his knees still, and Eva with her face hidden in her hands. The cellar was a strange scene to revisit within an hour of my deliverance from that very torture chamber. It had been something more before I left it, but in it I could think only of the first occupant of the camp stool. The lantern still burned upon the floor. There was the mattress still depressed where I had lain face to face with insolent death. The bullet was in the plaster. It could not have missed by the breadth of many hairs. In the corner was the shallow grave dug by Harris for my elements. And Harris was dead, and Santos was dead, but life and love were mine. I would have gone through it all again. And all at once I was on fire to be back in the library, so much so that half a minute at the manhole, lantern in hand, was enough for me, and a mere funnel of moist brown earth, a terribly low arch propped with beams, as much as I myself ever saw of the subterranean conduit between Kirby House and the sea. But I understood that the curious may traverse it for themselves to this day on payment of a very modest fee. As for me, I returned as I had come after, say, 5 minutes' absence, my head full once more of Eva, and of impatient anxiety for the wild young squire's final flight, and my heart still singing with the joy of which my beloved's kindness seemed a sufficient warranty. Poor egotist! Am I to tell you what I found when I came up those steep stairs to the chamber where I had left him on his knees to her, or can you guess? He was on his knees no more, but he held her in his arms, and as I entered he was kissing the tears from her wet flushed cheek. Her eyelids drooped. She was pale as the dead without, so pale that her eyebrows looked abnormally and dreadfully dark. She did not cling to him, neither did she resist his caresses, but lay passive in his arms as though her proper paradise was there. And neither heard me enter. It was as though they had forgotten all the world but one another. "So this is it," said I very calmly. "I can hear my voice as I write." They fell apart on the instant. Rattray glared at me, yet I saw that his eyes were dim. Eva clasped her hands before her, and looked me steadily in the face, but never a word. "You love him?" I said sternly. The silence of consent remained unbroken. "Villain as he is," I burst out. And at last Eva spoke. "I loved him before he was one," she said. "We were engaged." She looked at him standing by, his head bowed, his arms folded. Next moment she was very close to me, and fresh tears were in her eyes. But I stepped backward, for I had had enough. "Can you not forgive me?" "Oh dear, yes." "Can't you understand?" "Perfectly," said I. "You know you said—" "I have said so many things. But this was that you loved me well enough to give me up." And the silly ego in me, the endless and incorrigible, I imagined her pouting for withdrawal of those brave words. I not only said it, I declared, but I meant every word of it. None the less had I to turn from her to hide my anguish. I leaned my elbows on the narrow stone chimney-piece which, with the grate below and a small mirror above, formed an almost solitary oasis in the four walls of books. In the mirror I saw my face. It was wizened, drawn, old before its time, and merely ugly in its sore distress, merely repulsive in its bloody bandages. And in the mirror also I saw Rattray, handsome, romantic, audacious, all that I was not, nor ever would be, and I understood more than ever, and loathed my rival in my heart. I wheeled round on Eva. I was not going to give her up to him. I would tell her so before him, tell him so to his face. But she had turned away. She was listening to someone else. Her white forehead glistened. There were voices in the hall. "Mr. Cole! Mr. Cole! Where are you, Mr. Cole?" I moved over to the locked door. My hand found the key. I turned round with evil triumph in my heart, and God knows what upon my face. Rattray did not move. With lifted hands, the girl merely begging him to go by the door that was open, down the stair. He shook his head grimly. With an oath, I was upon them. "Go, both of you," I whispered hoarsely. "Now, while you can, and I can let you. Now, now!" Still Rattray hung back. I saw him glancing wistfully at my great revolver lying on the table under the lamp. I thrust it upon him and pushed him toward the door. "You go first. She shall follow. You will not grudge me one last word. Yes, I will take your hand if you escape. Be good to her." He was gone. Without, there was a voice still calling me, but now it sounded overhead. "Good-bye, Eva," I said. "You have not a moment to lose." Yet those divine eyes lingered on my ugliness. "You are in a very great hurry," said she, in the sharp little voice of her bitter moments. "You love him, that is enough." "And you too," she cried, "and you too." And her pure, warm arms were around my neck. Another instant and she would have kissed me. She! I know it. I knew it then, but it was more than I would bear. As a brother, I had heard that tale before. Back I stepped again, all the man in me rebelling. "That's impossible," said I rudely. "It isn't. It's true. I do love you. For this." God knows how I looked. "And I mayn't say good-bye to you," she whispered. And I love you for that." "Then you had better choose between us," said I. End of Dead Men Tell No Tales by E.W. Hornung, Chapter 19. Recording by Craig S. Werner of Tidewater, Virginia.
Chapter 20 of Dead Men Tell No Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. Dead Men Tell No Tales by E.W. Hornung. Chapter 20. The Statement of Francis Rattray. In the year 1858 I received a bulky packet bearing the stamp of the Argentine Republic, a realm in which, to the best of my belief, I had not a solitary acquaintance. The superscription told me nothing. In my relations with Rattray, his handwriting had never come under my observation. Judge then of my feelings when the first thing I read was his signature at the foot of the last page. For 5 years I had been uncertain whether he was alive or dead. I had heard nothing of him from the night we parted in Kirby Hall. All I knew was that he had escaped from England and the English police. His letter gave me no details of the incident. It was an astonishing letter. My breath was taken on the first close page. At the foot of it the tears were in my eyes, and all that part I must pass over without a word. I have never shown it to a man or woman. It is sacred between man and man. But the letter possessed other points of interest, of almost universal interest, to which no such scruples need apply, for it cleared up certain features of the foregoing narrative which had long been mysteries to all the world, and it gave me what I had tried in vain to fathom all these years, some explanation, or rather history, of the young Lancastrian's complicity with Joaquin Santos in the foul enterprise of the Lady Jermyn. And these passages I shall reproduce word for word, partly because of their intrinsic interest, partly for such new light as the day throw on this or that phase of the foregoing narrative, and lastly, out of fairness to, I hope, the most gallant and most generous youth who ever slipped upon the lower slopes of Avonmouth. Wrote Rattray. You wondered how I could have thrown in my lot with such a man. You may wonder still, for I never yet told living soul. I pretended I had joined him of my own free will. That was not quite the case. The facts were as follows. In my teens, as I think you know, I was at sea. I took my second mate's certificate at 20, and from that to 24 my voyages were far between and on my own account. I had given way to our hereditary passion for smuggling. I kept a yacht in Morecambe Bay, and more French brandy than I knew what to do with in my cellars. It was exciting for a time, but the excitement did not last. In 1851 the gold fever broke out in Australia. I shipped to Melbourne as third mate on a barque, and I deserted for the diggings in the usual course. But I was never a successful digger. I had little luck and less patience, and I have no doubt that many a good haul has been taken out of claims previously abandoned by me. For of one or two I had the mortification of hearing while still in the colony. I suppose I had not the temperament for the work. Dust would not do for me. I must have nuggets. So from Bendigo I drifted to the Ovens, and from the Ovens to Ballarat. But I did no more good on one field than on another, and eventually, early in 1853, I cast up in Melbourne again, with the intention of shipping home in the first vessel. But there were no crews for the homeward bounders, and while waiting for a ship my little stock of gold dust gave out. I became destitute first, then desperate. Unluckily for me, the beginning of '53 was the heyday of Captain Melville. He, the notorious bushranger. He was a young fellow of my own age. I determined to imitate his exploits. I could make nothing out there from an honest life. Rather than starve I would lead a dishonest one. I had been born with lawless tendencies. From smuggling to bushranging was an easy transition, and about the latter there seemed to be a gallantry and romantic swagger which put it on the higher plane of the two. But I was not born to be a bushranger either. I failed at the very first attempt. I was outwitted by my first victim, a thin old gentleman riding a cob at night on the Geelong road. "Why rob me?" said he. I have only £10 in my pocket, and the punishment will be the same as though it were 10,000. I want your cob, said I, for I was on foot. I'm a starving jack, and as I can't get a ship, I'm going to take to the bush. He shrugged his shoulders. To starve there, said he. My friend, it is a poor sport, this bushranging. I have looked into the matter on my own account. You not only die like a dog, but you live like one too. It is not worth while. No crime is worth while under 5 figures, my friend. A starving jack, eh? Instead of robbing me of £10, why not join me and take 10,000 as your share of our first robbery? A sailor is the very man I want. I told him that what I wanted was his cob, and that it was no use his trying to hoodwink me by pretending he was one of my sort, because I knew very well that he was not, at which he shrugged again, and slowly dismounted, after offering me his money, of which I took half. He shook his head, telling me I was very foolish, and I was coolly mounting, for he had never offered me the least resistance, with my pistols in my belt, when suddenly I heard one cocked behind me. Stop, said he. It's my turn. Stop, or I shoot you dead. The tables were turned, and he had me at his mercy as completely as he had been at mine. I made up my mind to being marched to the nearest police station, but nothing of the kind. I had misjudged my man as utterly as you misjudged him a few months later aboard the Lady Jermyn. He took me to his house on the outskirts of Melbourne, a weatherboard bungalow, scantily furnished, but comfortable enough, and there he seriously repeated the proposal he had made me off-hand in the road. Only he put it a little differently. Would I go to the hulks for attempting to rob him of £5, or would I stay and help him commit a robbery, of which my share alone would be 10 or 15,000? You know which I chose. You know who this man was. I said I would join him. He made me swear it, and then he told me what his enterprise was. There is no need for me to tell you, nor indeed had it taken definite shape at this time. Suffice it that Santos had wind that big consignments of Australian gold were shortly to be shipped home to England, that he, like myself, had done nothing on the diggings, where he had looked to make his fortune, and out of which he meant to make it still. It was an extraordinary life that we led in the bungalow. I the guest, he the host, and Eva the unsuspecting hostess and innocent daughter of the house. Santos had failed on the fields, but he had succeeded in making valuable friends in Melbourne. Men of position and of influence spent their evenings on our veranda, among others the Melbourne agent for the Lady Jermyn, the likeliest vessel then lying in the harbour, and the one to which the first consignment of gold dust would be entrusted if only a skipper could be found to replace the deserter who took you out. Santos made up his mind to find one. It took him weeks, but eventually he found Captain Harris on Bendigo, and Captain Harris was his man. More than that, he was the man for the agent, and the Lady Jermyn was once more made ready for sea. Now began the complications. Quite openly, Santos had bought the schooner Spindrift, freighted her with wool, given me the command, and vowed that he would go home in her rather than wait any longer for the Lady Jermyn. At the last moment he appeared to change his mind, and I sailed alone as many days as possible in advance of the ship, as had been intended from the first, but it went sorely against the grain when the time came. I would have given anything to have backed out of the enterprise. Honest I might be no longer. I was honestly in love with Eva Denison. Yet to have backed out would have been one way of losing her forever. Besides, it was not the first time I had run counter to the law, I who came of a lawless stock, but it would be the first time I had deserted a comrade or broken faith with one. I would do neither. In for a penny, in for a pound. But before my God I never meant it to turn out as it did, though I admit, and have always admitted, that my moral responsibility is but little if any the less on that account. Yet I was never a consenting party to wholesale murder, whatever else I was. The night before I sailed, Santos and the captain were aboard with me till the small hours. They promised me that every soul should have every chance, that nothing but unforeseen accident could prevent the boats from making ascension again in a matter of hours, that as long as the gig was supposed to be lost with all hands, nothing else mattered. So they promised, and that Harris meant to keep his promise I fully believe. That was not a wanton ruffian, but the other would spill blood like water, as I told you at the hall, and as no man now knows better than yourself. He was notorious even in Portuguese Africa on account of his atrocious treatment of the blacks. It was a favourite boast of his that he once poisoned a whole village, and that he himself tampered with the Lady Jermyn's boats. You can take my word, for I have heard him describe how he left it to the last night, and struck the blows during the applause at the concert on the quarter deck. He said it might have come out about the gold in the gig during the fire. It was safer to run no risks. The same thing came into play aboard the schooner. Never shall I forget the horror of that voyage after Santos came aboard. I had a crew of 8 hands all told, and 2 he brought with him in the gig. Of course they began talking about the gold. They would have their share or split when they got ashore, and there was mutiny in the air, with the steward and the quartermaster of the Lady Jermyn for ring leaders. Santos nipped it in the bud with a vengeance. He and Harris shot every man of them dead, and 2 were shot through the heart. They washed and dressed and set adrift to rot in the gig with false papers. God knows how we made Madeira. We painted the old name out and a new name in, on the way, and we shipped a Portuguese crew, not a man of whom could speak English. We shipped them aboard the Duke de Mondejo's yacht, Braganza. The schooner Spindrift had disappeared from the face of the waters forever, and with the men we took in plenty of sour claret and cigarettes, and we paid them well, and the Portuguese sailor is not inquisitive under such conditions. And now, honestly, I wished I had put a bullet through my head before joining in this murderous conspiracy, but retreat was impossible, even if I had been the man to draw back after going so far, and I had a still stronger reason for standing by the others to the bitter end. I could not leave Our Lady to these ruffians. On the other hand, neither could I take her from them, for, as you know, she justly regarded me as the most flagrant ruffian of them all. It was in me and through me that she was deceived, insulted, humbled, and contaminated, that she should ever have forgiven me for a moment is more than I can credit or fathom to this hour. So there we were. She would not look at me, and I would not leave her until death removed me. Santos had been kind enough to her hitherto. He had been kind enough, I understand, to her mother before her. It was only in the execution of his plans that he showed his Napoleonic disregard for human life, and it was precisely herein that I began to fear for the girl I still dared to love. She took up an attitude as dangerous to her safety as to our own. She demanded to be set free when we came to land. Her demand was refused. God forgive me, it had no bitter opponent than myself. And all we did was to harden her resolution. That mere child threatened us to our faces. Never shall I forget the scene. You know her spirit. If we would not set her free, she would tell all when we landed. And you remember how Santos used to shrug. That was all he did then. It was enough for me who knew him. For days I never left them alone together. Night after night I watched her cabin door, and she hated me the more for never leaving her alone. I had to resign myself to that. The night we anchored in Falmouth Bay, thinking then of taking our gold straight to the Bank of England, as eccentric lucky diggers, that night I thought would be the last for one or other of us. He locked her in her cabin. He posted himself outside on the settee. I sat watching him across the table. Each had a hand in his pocket. Each had a pistol in that hand. And there we sat, with our 4 eyes locked, while Harris went ashore for papers. He came back in great excitement, what with stopping at Madeira and calms, and the very few knots we could knock out of the schooner at the best of times. We had made a 7 or 8 weeks' voyage of it from Ascension, where, by the way, I had arrived only a couple of days before the Lady Jermyn, though I had nearly a month's start of her. Well, Harris came back in the highest state of excitement, and well he might. The papers were full of you, and of the burning of the Lady Jermyn. Now mark what happened. You know, of course, as well as I do, but I wonder if you can ever yet realise what it was to us. Our prisoner hears that you are alive, and she turns upon Santos and tells him he is welcome to silence her, but it will do us no good now, as you know that the ship was wilfully burned, and with what object. It is the single blow she can strike in self-defence, but a shrewder one could scarcely be imagined. She had talked to you at the very last, and by that time she did know the truth. What more natural than that she should confide it to you? She had time to tell you enough to hang the lot of us, and you may imagine our consternation on hearing that she had told you all she knew. From the first we were never quite sure whether to believe it or not. That the papers breathed no suspicion of foul play was neither here nor there. Scotland Yard might have seen to that. Then we read of the morbid reserve which was said to characterize all your utterances concerning the Lady Jermyn. What were we to do? What we no longer dared to do was to take our gold dust straight to the bank. What we did, you know. We ran round to Morecambe Bay, and landed the gold as we ratrays had landed lace and brandy from time immemorial. We left Eva in charge of Jane Braithwaite. God only knows how much against my will. But we were in a corner. It was life or death with us, and to find out how much you knew was a first plain necessity. And the means we took were the only means in our power. Nor shall I say more to you on that subject than I said 5 years ago in my poor old house. That is still the one part of the whole conspiracy of which I myself am most ashamed. And now it only remains for me to tell you why I have written all this to you, at such great length, so long after the event. My wife wished it. The fact is that she wants you to think better of me than I deserve. And yes, I confess that I should like you not to think quite as ill of me as you must have done all these years. I was villain enough, but do not think I am unpunished. I am an outlaw from my country. I am morally a transported felon. Only in this no man's land am I a free man. Let me but step across the border, and I am worth a little fortune to the man who takes me. And we have had a hard time here, though not so hard as I deserved, and the hardest part of all. But you must guess the hardest part, for the letter ended as it began, with sudden talk of his inner life and tentative inquiry after mine. In its entirety, as I say, I have never shown it to a soul. There was just a little more than I read to my wife, who could not hear enough about his. Then I folded up the letter, and even she has never seen the passages to which I allude. And yet I am not one of those who hold that the previous romances of married people should be taboo between them in after life. On the contrary, much mutual amusement of an innocent character may be derived from a fair and free interchange upon the subject, and this is why we, in our old age, or rather in mine, find a still unfailing topic in the story of which Eva Denison was wayward heroine and Frank Rattray the nearest approach to a hero. Sometimes these reminiscences lead to an argument, for it has been the fate of my life to become attached to argumentative persons. I suppose because I myself hate arguing. On the day that I received Rattray's letter we had one of our warmest discussions. I could repeat every word of it after 40 years. A good man does not necessarily make a good husband, I innocently remarked. Why do you say that? Asked my wife, who never would let a generalization pass unchallenged. I was thinking of Rattray, said I. The most tolerant of judges could scarcely have described him as a good man 5 years ago. Yet I can see that he has made an admirable husband, on the whole, and if you can't be both, it is better to be the good husband. It was this point that we debated with so much ardour. My wife would take the opposite side, that is her one grave fault. And I must introduce personalities. That, of course, is among the least of mine. I compared myself with Rattray as a husband, and, with some sincerity, to my own disparagement, I pointed out that he was an infinitely more fascinating creature, which was no hard saying, for that epithet at least I have never earned. And yet it was the word to sting my wife. Fascinating, perhaps, said she. Yes, that is the very word. But fascination is not love. And then I went to her and stroked her hair, for she had hung her head in deep distress, and kissed the tears from her eyes. and I swore that her eyes were as lovely as Eva Denison's, that there seemed even more gold in her glossy brown hair, that she was even younger to look at. And at last the craftiest compliment, my own love looked at me through her tears, as though some day or other she might forgive me. "Then why did you want to give me up to him?" said she. End of chapter 20. End of Dead Men Tell No Tales by E. W. Hornung.